It's the most famous missing person case in modern history. A 3-year-old girl vanishing from a holiday apartment without a trace. Her face became an unforgettable image of lost innocence, recognized all over the globe. For years, the investigation into Madeleine McCann's disappearance was a story of heartbreak, false leads, and an agonizing silence. The case went cold, buried under the weight of mistakes, a media frenzy, and time itself. It seemed destined to remain an unsolved tragedy, a permanent question mark. But what most of the world didn't see was the secret work happening behind the scenes. In 2011, 4 years after Madeleine vanished, a special team was assembled in London. Their mission, to do what everyone else had failed to do, to go back to the very beginning, to sift through every single piece of paper, every statement, every forgotten clue. They called it Operation Grange, and it would become the most expensive and exhaustive review of its kind. It was a secret investigation that would methodically dismantle the original inquiry, challenge old assumptions, and ultimately uncover a suspect who had been hiding in plain sight. This is the story of Operation Grange, the secret investigation that reignited hope and brought police closer than ever to answering the question that has haunted the world for nearly 2 decades. Where is Madeleine McCann? On the evening of May 3rd, 2007, the resort town of Praia da Luz in Portugal's Algarve region was peaceful. Tourists were enjoying the mild spring weather, including the McCann family. Kate and Jerry McCann were having dinner with friends at a tapas restaurant, just a short walk from their ground floor apartment, 5A, at the Ocean Club Resort. Inside, their 3 children, Madeleine and her 2-year-old twin siblings, were asleep. The parents and their friends, later known as the Tapas 7, had a system of checking on the children every so often. At around 10 p.m., Kate McCann walked to the apartment for her check. She opened the door to the children's bedroom and found the window open, the shutter raised, and Madeleine's bed empty. In that moment, a private family nightmare became a global mystery. The first few hours were frantic. A search was launched with resort staff, local police, and fellow tourists combing the complex and the surrounding streets. But as hours turned into days, a horrifying realization dawned. Madeleine was gone. The first investigation, led by the Portuguese Polícia Judiciária, was by many accounts chaotic from the start. The crime scene, apartment 5A, wasn't properly secured, which means it was likely contaminated by the dozens of people who rushed in and out during the initial panic. The investigation seemed to spin in multiple directions at once, struggling to land on a clear theory of what happened. Was it a kidnapping? A burglary gone wrong? Something else entirely? The public and media pressure was immense, unlike almost any case before it. The McCanns, desperate, launched a powerful media campaign, with celebrities like David Beckham and J.K. Rowling making appeals for Madeleine's safe return. But this global spotlight had a dark side. It fueled a storm of speculation, rumor, and conspiracy theories that started to drown out the facts. Soon the investigation took a shocking turn. 12 days after the disappearance, a British-Portuguese property consultant named Robert Murat, who lived nearby, was named the first formal suspect, or arguido. He was questioned for hours, and his home was searched, but no evidence was ever found linking him to the crime. His arguido status was eventually lifted a year later. But then, in a devastating twist, investigators turned on the very people at the heart of the tragedy. In September 2007, 4 months after their daughter vanished, Kate and Jerry McCann were themselves named arguido. The Portuguese police, unable to find a breakthrough, started exploring theories that the McCanns were somehow involved. Baseless claims, and wild stories filled the tabloids. These theories were fueled by a former Portuguese detective who later published a book alleging their involvement, a book for which the McCanns eventually won a libel case. For the McCanns, it was an unimaginable nightmare. While dealing with the grief of their missing daughter, they were now being publicly accused in a foreign country. They returned to the UK, their names still under a cloud of suspicion. It wasn't until July 2008, over a year after Madeleine disappeared, that the Portuguese authorities finally shelved the investigation, lifting the arguido status from the McCanns and Robert Murat and admitting they'd hit a dead end. To the public, it seemed the case was over. The trail was cold, the leads had dried up, and the world's most famous missing person case was now officially unsolved. The years that followed were filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the McCanns' tireless fight to keep their daughter's memory alive. But across the channel, at Scotland Yard, the story was far from over. By 2011, the official investigation into Madeleine McCann's disappearance had been collecting dust for 3 years. But public interest never died, and the McCanns and their supporters relentlessly lobbied the British government to step in. They argued that crucial leads had been ignored, and that a fresh pair of eyes was desperately needed. Finally, their calls were answered. On May 12, 2011, at the request of the Home Secretary, London's Metropolitan Police announced it was lending its expertise to the case. This was the birth of Operation Grange. It's important to understand what Operation Grange was from the beginning. It wasn't a new investigation, but an investigative review. It had no legal power in Portugal. Its job was to re-examine the mountain of material that had already been gathered. Led by Detective Chief Inspector Andy Redwood, a dedicated team was assembled, eventually growing to over 30 detectives and staff. Their task was huge. They had to review every single document on the case, the entire Portuguese police file, hundreds of thousands of pages long, reports from private investigators hired by the McCanns, witness statements, and thousands of public tip-offs. It was a massive effort to rebuild a cold case from the ground up. The whole philosophy of Operation Grange was different. DCI Redwood and his team decided to approach the case with one main assumption. This was likely a criminal act by a stranger, possibly a planned abduction. This was a clear shift from the scattered theories pursued before. They methodically cross-referenced every piece of information, looking for the connections that had been missed, the dots that were never joined. They created the most detailed timeline yet of the hours, days, and even weeks surrounding Madeleine's disappearance. The cost of this review was significant, funded by the Home Office since the crime happened outside the Met's usual territory. Over the years, the funding for Operation Grange would run into the millions of pounds, showing the British government's commitment to finding answers. The team started its work in secret, far from the media glare that had complicated things so badly the first time. They were looking for a needle in a haystack, a forgotten clue, a contradictory statement, an overlooked witness that could break the case wide open. They believed the answer was probably already there, hidden somewhere in that vast archive. They just had to find it. For 2 years, the Operation Grange team worked, piecing together the complex puzzle of the McCann case. They translated Portuguese documents, digitized files, and built a massive database. And slowly, their hard work started to pay off. By July 2013, Scotland Yard announced a huge shift. Operation Grange was moving from a review to a full-blown investigation. They had found what they were looking for: genuinely new lines of inquiry. The team revealed they had identified 38 people of interest, including 12 from the UK, who needed a closer look. This was a stunning development in a case that had been cold for years. These weren't necessarily suspects, but people whose movements or stories on the night of the disappearance just didn't add up. The new leads didn't come from a single bombshell, but from painstakingly re-examining old evidence with fresh eyes and new technology. One of the most important areas was mobile phone data. The team analyzed a huge data set of phone calls made in and around Praia da Luz on the night Madeleine vanished. This was a complex task that wasn't fully done in the first inquiry. By mapping which phones were active, where they were, and who was talking to whom, they hoped to build a digital footprint of everyone near apartment 5A. This would turn out to be absolutely critical years later. They also re-evaluated witness statements. Dozens of tourists and locals had reported seeing suspicious people or strange activity in the days before May 3rd. Many of these reports had been dismissed or not fully investigated. The Grange team took them seriously. They compiled sightings of men lurking near the Ocean Club apartments, some supposedly collecting for a fake charity. This led to new e-fit images, released in a high-profile BBC Crime Watch appeal in October 2013. One image was particularly interesting. A man seen carrying a child, maybe asleep and in pajamas like Madeleine's, walking toward the beach at around 9:15 p.m. that night. Another key theory from Operation Grange was a burglary gone wrong. They found a big spike in burglaries in Praia da Luz in the months before Madeleine disappeared. The method was often similar. Thieves targeted holiday apartments while people were out, getting in through unlocked doors or windows. The team theorized that Madeleine might have woken up during a burglary, startling the intruder, who then panicked and abducted her. This theory helped explain why the crime seemed so opportunistic and why there was never a ransom demand. The move to a full investigation meant British detectives could now, with cooperation from Portuguese authorities, who had also reopened the case, pursue these leads directly. The years of silence were over. Hope, which had faded for so many, was suddenly back. Operation Grange had breathed new life into the case, armed with new theories, new persons of interest, and a clear path forward. With new leads to chase, Operation Grange moved from the archives of London to the sun-baked Algarve. In June 2014, British police, working with their Portuguese counterparts, conducted the first major searches in the area in years. Using ground-penetrating radar and sniffer dogs, they focused on scrubland near the Ocean Club resort. The world watched, holding its breath, as images of police digging were broadcast everywhere. Hopes were sky-high that this would be the moment, the breakthrough that would finally bring answers. But after days of intense work, the searches turned up nothing. The investigation continued, but it was slow, grinding work. The 38 persons of interest were looked into, and many were ruled out. The number of officers on the Grange team was gradually reduced as leads were exhausted. By 2015, the team was scaled back significantly, though a small dedicated group stayed on to chase the most promising clues. The initial optimism began to fade. Despite the millions spent and the countless hours of police work, Operation Grange still hadn't found that one definitive clue. For the public, it started to feel like history repeating itself. A massive effort and a burst of hope, followed by a slow return to the same frustrating silence. The media attention faded, replaced by small updates on funding approvals for the shrinking investigation. The team had successfully sifted through the past and cleaned up the timeline, but they still lacked the key piece of evidence to connect a specific person to the crime. The years ticked by. The 10th anniversary of Madeleine's disappearance came and went in 2017. The McCanns continued their campaign, vowing to never give up. Behind the scenes, the remaining Grange detectives did the same. still working the few leads they had left. The case was no longer in the global spotlight, but it wasn't closed. The team was waiting for a break, for any new piece of information that could validate their years of work. They had no idea that the most significant lead of the entire investigation had already been given to police in another country. A lead that would point them to one man and change everything. The work of Operation Grange shows the incredible dedication it takes to keep a cold case alive. This investigation has spanned more than a decade, crossed borders, and involved thousands of hours of painstaking detective work. If you find these deep dives into complex cases compelling, please consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications. It helps us keep making detailed content and ensures you won't miss our future investigations. Now let's get back to the moment the entire focus of the Madeleine McCann case shifted to just one man. In June 2020, 13 years after Madeleine McCann disappeared, the case was thrown back into the international spotlight. German police, in a joint appeal with Scotland Yard and Portuguese authorities, made a stunning announcement. They had identified a new prime suspect. His name was Christian Bruckner, a 43-year-old German national, already in a German prison for other crimes. Suddenly, all the pieces Operation Grange had been assembling seemed to click into place. Bruckner wasn't just some random person of interest. He was a convicted sex offender with a history of child abuse who had lived in the Algarve between 1995 and 2007. He was a drifter, living in a distinctive VW campervan and various houses in the area, including one near Praia de Luz. The link to Bruckner came from a crucial tip. In 2017, after an appeal on the 10th anniversary of Madeleine's disappearance, a man contacted German police, claiming that Bruckner had confessed his involvement in the case to him years earlier. While this was explosive, it was the digital evidence that solidified Bruckner as the prime suspect. The phone data analysis from Operation Grange proved vital. German investigators revealed that on the night of May 3, 2007, a mobile phone registered to Christian Bruckner received a half-hour phone call. Crucially, cell tower data placed that phone right next to the Ocean Club Resort, around the time Madeleine disappeared. The very next day, Bruckner transferred ownership of his Jaguar to someone else. This was the breakthrough investigators had been working toward for nearly a decade. German prosecutors publicly stated they believed Madeleine McCann was dead and that Bruckner was their suspect for her murder. His profile was a chilling match. He was known for burglaries in holiday resorts, and most disturbingly, he had a prior conviction for the brutal rape of a 72-year-old American woman in her Praia de Luz home in 2005, less than 2 years before Madeleine vanished, and in the exact same town. Despite the confidence of German authorities, they faced a huge hurdle. They had strong circumstantial evidence, but no definitive forensic proof, no DNA, no body, to formally charge him with Madeleine's murder. Bruckner, through his lawyer, has always denied any involvement. In April 2022, to stop the statute of limitations from expiring, Portuguese authorities officially named him an arguido, the same status once held by the McCanns and Robert Murat. After years of searching for a ghost, investigators finally had a name and a face. The focus of the entire international inquiry, from London to Lisbon, was now squarely on one man, Christian Bruckner. The final chapter became a desperate hunt for that last piece of the puzzle. With Christian Bruckner as the main suspect, the investigation entered a new, targeted phase. The goal was no longer to sift through endless possibilities, but to find concrete evidence linking him directly to Madeleine's disappearance. This led to a series of highly publicized searches in Portugal, driven by German intelligence. In May 2023, attention turned to the Arade Reservoir, about 30 miles from Praia de Luz. It was a spot Bruckner reportedly called his little paradise. For days, German and Portuguese police descended on the remote area, digging pits, taking soil samples, and scouring the reservoir's banks for any trace of Madeleine. Despite the massive effort, the search concluded with no significant findings announced. Then, in June 2025, a new, even more focused search began. This time, police cordoned off an area of scrubland much closer to Praia da Luz itself, between the Ocean Club Resort and a cottage where Bruckner once lived. Investigators brought in heavy machinery, pickaxes, and drained a well, meticulously examining plots of land. The searches were requested by German authorities, suggesting they had new intelligence pointing to this specific spot. They were reportedly using ground-penetrating radar, capable of scanning deep beneath the earth. After 3 days, the search ended with police taking away some material for analysis, but no immediate breakthrough was announced. While these searches were happening, Bruckner's legal situation got more complicated. He remains in a German prison for the 2005 rape. However, he was acquitted of several other unrelated sex offense charges in October 2024, and thanks to a fine being paid by a mysterious donor, he could be eligible for release as early as September 2025. This has added a sense of urgency, as authorities worry he could disappear if freed. German prosecutors admit they don't have enough evidence to charge him in the McCann case without new definitive proof. As of today, the hunt continues. Police are scouring the Portuguese earth, hoping to unearth the one piece of physical evidence that has remained hidden for nearly 2 decades. The searches represent the culmination of Operation Grange's long journey, from a cold case review in a London office to a targeted search, with a single suspect at its center. The ongoing searches show that even after all this time, authorities haven't given up hope of finding answers for Madeleine's family. Cases like this capture the public's attention for years, and every new development matters. If you want to stay informed on this case and others we cover, please subscribe to the channel. We'd also like to hear from you in the comments. Please be respectful, but let us know your thoughts on the investigation. What theory or piece of evidence do you find most compelling? Your engagement helps us build a community dedicated to understanding these complex stories. The story of Operation Grange is a remarkable tale of police persistence against incredible odds. It began as a quiet review of a case the world thought was unsolvable. A case marred by early mistakes and media hysteria. For years, detectives worked in the background, carefully rebuilding the investigation from scratch, driven by the belief that the truth was buried in the files. Their work wasn't one dramatic aha moment, but a slow, methodical grind that ultimately did what the initial inquiry failed to do. It transformed the case from a mystery with no direction into a focused investigation with a prime suspect. Thanks to Operation Grange, the narrative is no longer about the baseless suspicions that once haunted Kate and Jerry McCann. Instead, it's centered on Christian Bruckner, a convicted predator whose history and location put him at the scene of the crime. While German prosecutors are convinced of his guilt, the final crucial piece of evidence, the piece needed to bring a formal charge for the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, remains just out of reach. He has not been charged and maintains his innocence. And so, nearly 2 decades later, the searches continue. The funding for Operation Grange, though smaller, continues to be approved, a symbol of an unwavering commitment. The world still watches, hoping that each dig, each new search, will be the one that ends the agonizing uncertainty. Operation Grange may not have found Madeleine McCann, but it carved a path through the darkness, providing the most credible and promising lead in the history of the case. It has brought investigators to the doorstep of an answer, But until that door is finally opened, the haunting question remains, echoing through the years: where is Madeleine?